The massive alien warships blocked out the stars as they descended toward Earth's moon like metal vultures. Their dark hulls gleamed with energy shields that made the vacuum around them shimmer with deadly light. Inside the lead vessel, Commander. Thane studied the tactical display with cold satisfaction. The third planet's natural satellite would make an excellent staging ground for the final assault. Begin excavation of the primary landing zone, Thane ordered through his translator device. His forearms moved across the command console with practiced efficiency. The Rigelian Empire had conquered 47 worlds using these exact tactics. Establish orbital superiority, secure high ground, then systematically destroy the enemy's population centers. Down on the lunar surface, massive plasma excavators tore into the ancient regolith. The alien machines carved deep trenches and bunkers, without any regard for what lay beneath. Centuries-old footprints vanished under churning metal treads. A small metal flag bearing red, white, and blue colors crumpled beneath a landing strut. Memorial plaques that had weathered solar radiation and micrometeorite impacts for generations shattered into fragments. The Sea of Tranquility, once a symbol of human achievement and peaceful exploration, became a military fortress in less than 6 hours. Weapon platforms rose from the excavated craters like mechanical flowers blooming in fast motion. Energy cannons that could crack continents swiveled toward the blue-green world hanging in the black sky. Admiral Rebecca Torres watched the destruction through orbital surveillance feeds from her bunker deep beneath Colorado's mountains. Her weathered hands gripped the edge of the tactical table until her knuckles turned white. Around her, junior officers maintained their professional composure, but she could see the fury building behind their eyes. "They don't even know what they're destroying," whispered Lieutenant Davis, the youngest member of her staff. His voice carried the kind of rage that comes from watching sacred things turned to rubble. Torres had been there when humanity first returned to the moon in 2157. She had stood in that same spot where alien machines now carved weapons emplacements. She had touched the memorial to the first humans who dared to leave their home world and plant their feet on another celestial body. Now it was gone, erased as if it had never mattered. "Ma'am, we're receiving reports from the outer colonies," reported Communications Officer Wright. "The civilian populations are reacting strongly to the footage. On screens throughout human space, the images spread like wildfire. Miners on distant asteroids stopped their work to stare at feeds showing alien excavators destroying humanity's most sacred historical site. Colonists on farming worlds gathered in town squares, watching in stunned silence as their species' first footsteps beyond Earth disappeared beneath foreign metal. The hegemony fleet had expected fear. They had calculated human military capabilities and found them wanting. Their intelligence reports spoke of a young species with limited technology and no significant defensive installations. What they hadn't accounted for was the emotional response their actions would trigger. Commander Thane received his first tactical update as the moon base neared completion. "Sir, we're detecting increased activity throughout the human colonies. Ship movements appear to be irregular." "Explain," Thane demanded, his primary eyes focusing on the tactical display while his secondary eyes monitored the excavation progress. "Civilian vessels are departing their normal routes. Mining ships have gone dark across 17 systems. We're also picking up communication spikes on frequencies we haven't been able to decode." Thane's mouth parts clicked dismissively. "Fear responses. Their civilian population is fleeing. Standard behavior for a species facing extinction." But the tactical officer's next report carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. "Sir, some of these civilian ships aren't following standard evacuation patterns. They're converging." On Earth, the first cities began burning under orbital bombardment. New York's skyline crumbled under particle beams that struck from the moon with pinpoint accuracy. Tokyo's sprawling districts disappeared in controlled explosions that spoke of military precision rather than random destruction. The aliens weren't just conquering humanity, they were making an example of them. In the depths of space, something stirred in response to the carnage. Automated listening posts that had been silent for decades suddenly came online. Deep space monitoring stations began transmitting on frequencies that hadn't been used since the early days of human expansion. Most curious of all, civilian ships throughout human territory started changing course toward coordinates that appeared in no official navigation database. Dr. Neil Harrison crouched in the ruins of what had once been the Smithsonian Institute, sifting through scattered data crystals and melted archive storage. As a xenoarchaeologist, he had spent his career studying dead alien civilizations. Now he searched desperately through humanity's own records for anything that might help them avoid joining those extinct species. His scanner beeped as it detected an intact data core from the old SETI archives. The information inside dated back to humanity's first attempts to contact alien life, but something about the file structure seemed wrong. The data was too complex, too layered for simple radio. Telescope observations. That's impossible, Harrison muttered as he decoded the files. The archive contained detailed information about galactic military tactics, weapon technologies that wouldn't be invented for centuries, and most disturbing of all, tactical assessments of species that humanity supposedly had never encountered. As if responding to his discovery, Harrison's communication device crackled to life with a message that made his blood freeze. Archive 77 Alpha has been accessed. Protocols are now active. Await further instructions. The voice was human, but it carried an authority that seemed to echo from the depths of time itself. Harrison had never heard of Archive 77 Alpha, and according to his security clearance, he should have access to all historical records. Yet something in that voice suggested that humanity's real archives had been hidden far longer than anyone realized. Above them all, alien ships continued their systematic destruction of human civilization, while their commanders congratulated themselves on another swift conquest. They had no way of knowing that their decision to build their fortress on sacred ground had triggered something that had been waiting patiently for this exact moment. The first pieces of an ancient plan were falling into place, and humanity's true nature was about to reveal itself to a galaxy that had greatly underestimated the sleeping giant. Old Pete Williams had been tending his small farm on the edge of New Montana colony for 37 years. His neighbors knew him as a quiet man who grew excellent corn and minded his own business. What they didn't know was that 40 years ago, Pete Williams had been Lieutenant Commander Williams of the Human Defense Corps, a man who had earned 3 medals for tactical brilliance during the border wars. Pete stood in his cornfield, watching smoke rise from the direction of the colony's main settlement. The alien bombardment had started 3 hours ago, and emergency broadcasts urged all civilians to evacuate immediately. Instead, Pete walked calmly to his barn and began moving hay bales aside. Beneath them lay a sealed metal case that hadn't been opened in decades. Across human space, similar scenes were playing out on thousands of worlds. Retired soldiers who had been living quiet civilian lives suddenly remembered skills they had tried to forget. Shop owners closed their stores and disappeared into the night. Farmers abandoned their crops to head for destinations they shouldn't have known existed. On the lunar surface, Commander Thane reviewed the latest intelligence reports with growing confusion. Human ship movements had become completely unpredictable. Vessels that should have been fleeing toward the outer rim were instead converging on coordinates that made no strategic sense. Even more puzzling, many of these ships weren't appearing in any of their databases. "Sir," reported his intelligence, "Officer, we're tracking approximately 2,000 human vessels heading toward the Jupiter system. Our projections indicate they should be fleeing in the opposite direction." Thane's 4 eyes studied the tactical display. The human response defied every military doctrine his species understood. When facing superior firepower, intelligent species either surrendered or scattered. They didn't gather their remaining forces in obvious locations where they could be easily destroyed. Perhaps their military leadership has suffered complete breakdown, suggested his tactical advisor. These could be random panic movements. Dr. Harrison had spent 12 hours in the ruins of Washington, decoding files that officially didn't exist. Each archive he accessed revealed information that challenged everything he thought he knew about human history. The SETI project hadn't been searching for alien signals at all. It had been maintaining communication with something much closer to home. His hands trembled as he read transmission logs dating back 2 centuries. Messages sent not to distant stars, but to coordinates within the solar system itself. Responses that came not from alien civilizations, but from automated systems using human technology that was supposedly centuries ahead of its time. "My God," Harrison whispered as the truth became clear. "We've been planning for this since before we left Earth." The archive revealed the existence of deep space installations that had been constructed in secret during humanity's early expansion, period. Not simple research stations or mining facilities, but massive shipyards and weapons platforms hidden in the dark spaces between worlds. According to the files, they had been waiting silently for over 200 years. Harrison's communicator buzzed again. This time the voice was different, but carried the same ageless authority. "Dr. Harrison, your presence is required at Facility 7. Transportation will arrive in 17 minutes. "I never told anyone I was here," Harrison said to the empty ruins around him. "How do you know where I am?" "We have been watching, Doctor. We have always been watching." General Pike had been enjoying his retirement on Mars until the alien invasion began. His small apartment overlooked the rust-colored plains where he had once trained the best soldiers humanity had ever produced. Now, at 73 years old, he found himself suiting up in military gear that felt as familiar as his own skin. The coded transmissions had started arriving within hours of the first alien attack. Frequencies he recognized from classified operations decades past. Ship identification codes for vessels that had been officially decommissioned before the current generation of officers had even been born. Most impossible of all, tactical orders signed with authorization codes that belonged to dead men. Pike's personal computer chimed with an incoming message marked with the highest possible security classification. The sender was listed as Admiral Thomas Kirk, who had died in a transport accident 15 years ago. The message contained a single line. "Operation Lazarus is now active. Proceed to Rally Point Alpha." Rally Point Alpha was a coordinate deep in the asteroid belt. Pike had helped choose that location during a strategic planning session in 2178, as part of a theoretical exercise that had never been officially approved. Yet somehow, that theoretical contingency plan was now being activated by people who should have been dead. Pike began packing his equipment with the efficiency of long practice. Around him, Mars colony showed signs of the same mysterious activity he had been observing throughout human space. Civilian ships launched without filing flight plans. Communication networks carried encrypted traffic using codes that predated current security protocols. Most telling of all, the planet's defense installations were powering up systems that weren't supposed to exist. On Earth, the hegemony continued their systematic bombardment, focusing on major population centers and military installations. Their sensors detected the expected chaos of a collapsing civilization, emergency broadcasts, evacuation ships, and communication networks failing under the strain of coordinating refugee movements. What their sensors couldn't detect was the deeper pattern emerging beneath the apparent chaos. Hidden transmission nodes were coming online across the solar system. Ancient automated systems were responding to activation codes that had been embedded in routine communications for generations. Most significantly, Ship construction facilities that had been disguised as civilian manufacturing centers were beginning to produce vessels whose designs appeared in no known human database. The alien intelligence officers dismissed these anomalies as the desperate improvisations of a dying species. Their experience with 47 previous conquests had taught them that fear often drove civilizations to attempt impossible defensive measures. These humans would break like all the others once they realized the futility of resistance. Commander, Thane observed the growing human fleet concentrations with cold satisfaction. The enemy was making his task easier by gathering their remaining forces in predictable locations. His tactical computers had already calculated optimal strike patterns that would eliminate 90% of human military capability within the first hour of engagement. "Begin preparing for the final assault," Thane ordered. "These humans have chosen to die together rather than separately. We shall accommodate their preference." But deep in the space between Mars and Jupiter, something was stirring that would challenge every assumption the hegemony had made about their latest conquest. The coordinates where human ships were gathering had been empty space when the aliens first scanned the system. Now, massive structures were beginning to emerge from the darkness like technological icebergs surfacing in an ocean of stars. The legend was waking up, and the galaxy was about to discover that humanity's greatest achievement wasn't their technology or their courage. It was their patience. Deep beneath the ice fields of Europa, systems that had been dormant for over 2 centuries began their startup sequences. The facility had been built into the moon's frozen ocean during the early days of solar expansion, disguised as a scientific research station. Now, massive doors that had never opened began to crack the ice above them, revealing launch bays large enough to hold ships that humanity supposedly had never built. Captain Laura Stone commanded the HSV Defiance, the last operational heavy cruiser in the Human Defense Corps fleet. Her ship had been fighting a running battle with alien interceptors for 18 hours, using hit-and-run tactics to avoid the overwhelming firepower of the main hegemony fleet. She had just enough fuel for one more jump when her navigation computer received coordinates that appeared in no official database. "Ma'am, we're getting some kind of automated navigation update," reported her communications officer. "The source is encrypted with codes I've never seen before." Stone studied the coordinates on her display. They pointed to a location in the Awoke Kuiper belt, far beyond the orbit of Pluto. According to her ship's sensors, there was nothing there but empty space and a few scattered ice chunks. But the signal strength suggested something massive was transmitting from those coordinates. "Set course for the Kuiper coordinates," Stone ordered. "If someone's offering us help, we're not in a position to refuse." The jump through hyperspace took 14 minutes. When the Defiance emerged, Stone's crew stood in stunned silence at what their sensors revealed. Hanging in the darkness was a structure so vast that their instruments initially mistook it for a small moon. Geometric frameworks of metal and ceramic stretched for hundreds of kilometers in all directions, surrounding what appeared to be the largest shipyard humanity had ever constructed. "Captain," whispered her tactical officer, "I'm reading over 300 ship signatures. They're all human designs, but I don't recognize any of the configurations." Stone opened a communication channel toward the massive facility. "Unknown station, this is Captain Stone of the HSV Defiance. Please identify yourself." The response came immediately in a voice that carried the authority of deep time. "Welcome to Outpost 7, Captain Stone. We have been expecting you. Please dock at Bay 17 for briefing and resupply." "Expecting me? Who is this? How do you know my name?" "All questions will be answered, Captain. For now, know that humanity's real fleet is finally ready to reveal itself." On Earth, the resistance movement had grown beyond anything the hegemony intelligence services could explain. Small groups of humans were conducting military operations with a level of coordination that suggested access to advanced tactical networks. Even more disturbing, these operations showed knowledge of alien combat doctrine that humans shouldn't possess. Commander Thane reviewed the latest battlefield reports with increasing unease. Human resistance fighters were using tactics specifically designed to counter Rigelian military procedures. They knew exactly where to strike alien supply lines for maximum effect. They anticipated hegemony troop movements with uncanny accuracy. "Sir," reported his intelligence chief, "we've captured several human prisoners for interrogation. The results are unusual." "Explain." "The prisoners claim to have no formal military training, yet they demonstrate tactical knowledge equivalent to our senior officers. When questioned about their combat skills, they state that the knowledge simply came to them when the fighting began." Thane's secondary eyes focused on the tactical displays, while his primary eyes studied the interrogation. Reports: individual humans were fighting with the collective wisdom of an entire military tradition, as if their species maintained some form of shared combat consciousness that activated during times of extreme threat. Dr. Harrison had been transported to Facility 7 by a ship he didn't recognize, piloted by a crew who seemed to know him despite his certainty that they had never met. The facility itself defied everything he thought he knew about human engineering capabilities. Corridors stretched for kilometers through installations carved from solid asteroids. The technology around him was clearly human in design, but incorporated. Advances that wouldn't be developed for decades. "Dr. Harrison, thank you for coming," said a woman who introduced herself as Director Walsh. She appeared to be in her 40s, but something in her eyes suggested she had seen far more years than her face revealed. "I don't understand what's happening," Harrison admitted. "These facilities, this technology, none of it should exist." Director Walsh gestured for him to follow her down a corridor lined with historical displays. "Dr. Harrison, what do you know about the Prometheus Project?" "I've never heard of it." "That was the intention. The Prometheus Project began in 2089, 37 years before humanity's first contact with alien life. A group of far-sighted individuals realized that our expansion into space would eventually bring us into conflict with older, more powerful civilizations. They passed displays showing the early construction of hidden facilities throughout the solar system. Massive automated shipyards disguised as mining operations, weapons research installations hidden in the dark spaces between planets. Most remarkably, a project to digitally preserve the knowledge and personalities of humanity's greatest military minds. "We have been preparing for this war for over 2 centuries, Doctor. Every human who has ever distinguished themselves in combat, every tactical innovation, every strategic insight has been preserved and studied. When the time came, we would be ready to face any threat with the accumulated wisdom of our entire species." Harrison stared at a display showing ship designs that incorporated technology decades ahead of current human capabilities. "But how did you hide all this? How did you build these facilities without anyone knowing?" "The same way humans have always survived, Doctor. We planned ahead, we worked together, and we made sure our enemies underestimated us until the moment we chose to reveal our true strength." General Pike arrived at Rally Point Alpha to find a scene that challenged his understanding of human military capacity. Ships filled the space around a massive command station that hadn't existed the last time he had checked long-range sensors of this region. But more shocking than the ships themselves were the people commanding them. "Pike, good to see you again," said a familiar voice over his ship's communication system. "This is Admiral Kirk. Please report to the command center for briefing." "Kirk, you died 15 years ago. I attended your funeral. Death is a temporary inconvenience when your species' survival is at stake. The technology exists to preserve consciousness in digital format. We've been using it to maintain our command structure despite the passage of time." Pike docked his ship with hands that shook slightly despite his military discipline. The command center bustled with activity as hundreds of officers coordinated, the largest military operation in human history. What disturbed Pike most was how many of the faces he recognized belonged to people who should have been dead. Admiral Kirk looked exactly as Pike remembered him, but with an additional depth to his gaze that spoke of years spent in digital existence. Pike, I know this is difficult to accept, but we realized long ago that humanity's greatest strategic advantage was our ability to learn from the past. So we made sure the past would always be available to guide us. How many ships do we have? Pike asked, focusing on tactical matters to avoid dwelling on the philosophical implications. Currently, approximately 12,000 combat vessels of various classes, all built using technology developed in secret over the past 2 centuries. All crewed by individuals who chose to serve beyond the normal limits of biological existence. Frey looked out at the assembled fleet through the command center's viewing ports. Ships of designs he had never seen stretched to the horizon in all directions. My God, we've been planning this war since before most of these aliens were born. The hegemony conquers young civilizations by overwhelming them before they can. Develop adequate defenses, Admiral Kirk explained. They prey on species that haven't had time to prepare, but humanity has had 2 centuries to get ready for this fight. Commander Thane received his next intelligence report with growing concern. Human ship concentrations were no longer behaving according to any rational tactical doctrine. Instead of fleeing or preparing desperate last stands, they appeared to be forming up for coordinated offensive operations. Sir, we're detecting massive energy signatures from multiple locations throughout the human solar system. Installations that weren't there yesterday are now showing up on our sensors. Thane studied the tactical displays with all 4 eyes. The humans weren't just fielding more ships than intelligence had predicted. They were revealing infrastructure that suggested decades of secret preparation. Prepare the fleet for immediate assault, Thane ordered. We will not allow this species time to fully deploy whatever they have been hiding. But even as his ships began moving toward their attack coordinates, Thane couldn't shake the growing suspicion that humanity had been expecting this invasion for a very long time. And if they had been expecting it, they might have prepared defenses that his 47 previous conquests hadn't taught him to recognize. The first human ship to decloak did so less than 1,000 kilometers from Commander Thane's flagship. One moment his sensors showed empty space, the next moment they detected a massive dreadnought whose design appeared in none of his tactical databases. Before he could react, 17 more ships materialized around his position, their weapons already locked onto his vessel. Unknown alien commander, came a transmission in perfect Rigelian. This is Admiral Harrison of the Terran Ghost Fleet. You have 60 seconds to withdraw from this system or face the consequences. Thane's tactical officer worked frantically at his instruments. Sir, I'm reading over 40 human vessels in our immediate area, but they're not showing up consistently on sensors. Their stealth technology is beyond anything in our databases. That's impossible, Thane snarled. Our intelligence reports indicate that humans have primitive cloaking capabilities at best. The voice of Admiral Harrison carried an undertone of dark amusement when he responded. Your intelligence reports are based on what we allowed you to observe, Commander. For 2 centuries, humanity has been very careful to appear less advanced than we actually are. Throughout the solar system, similar scenes were playing out as human vessels revealed themselves from concealment. Ships that had been hiding in asteroid fields, cloaked installations that had been disguised as space debris, and most shocking of all, weapons platforms that had been built into planets themselves. On Mars, General Pike watched through orbital feeds as the planet's surface began to transform. What colonists had always believed were terraforming installations were actually massive defense cannons rising from concealed silos. The red planet's 2 small moons moved out of their natural orbits, revealing themselves to be artificial constructs armed with weapons that could crack continents. How long have we been building all this? Pike asked Admiral Kirk, who stood beside him in the command center. Since 2156, Kirk replied. Every human colony, every mining operation, every scientific expedition has also served as cover for military construction. We learned early that the galaxy is not a safe place for unprepared species. Pike studied the tactical displays showing human defensive positions throughout the solar system. We've turned our entire civilization into a fortress. Not a fortress, Pike. A trap. We've spent 2 centuries appearing weak and defenseless while building the most advanced military force the galaxy has ever seen. The hegemony thinks they're conquering a young civilization. Instead, they've walked into a carefully prepared ambush. Dr. Harrison stood in the archives beneath Facility 7, surrounded by holographic displays showing the true scope of humanity's secret preparations. Director Walsh guided him through records that revealed the staggering ambition of the Prometheus project. "We didn't just build ships and weapons," Walsh explained. "We preserved the consciousness of every significant military leader in human history. Alexander the Great advises our ground combat operations. Sun Tzu designed our strategic doctrine. Patton leads our armored divisions." Harrison stared at a display showing digital personality matrices for over 3,000 historical figures. "You've created a council of humanity's greatest military minds. More than that, we've given them access to technology they could only dream of during their biological lifetimes. Imagine Rommel commanding hover tanks, or Nelson directing space. Battles with the tactical knowledge of ancient naval warfare adapted for 3-dimensional combat." The implications staggered Harrison. Humanity hadn't just prepared for alien invasion, they had created a military force that combined advanced technology with the accumulated strategic wisdom of their entire species. "But how did you know the aliens would come?" Director Walsh smiled sadly. "Because we've been listening to their communications for centuries. The galaxy is full of the ghosts of civilizations that weren't prepared for first contact. We decided humanity would not join them." Captain Stone walked through the corridors of Outpost 7, marveling at technology that seemed decades ahead of anything she had seen in official service. Her escort, a young ensign who introduced himself as Davis, answered her questions with the enthusiasm of someone sharing a secret he had kept for years. "The shipyards here have been operational for over a century," Davis explained. "We've been producing vessels using designs that won't be officially invented for another 50 years. Every ship in the Ghost Fleet incorporates technology reverse-engineered from alien wreckage we've been collecting since first contact." They passed a viewing window that looked out onto the construction bays. Stone watched in amazement as massive vessels took shape under the guidance of automated construction systems, ships whose hulls incorporated materials she didn't recognize, whose weapons systems defied standard human design principles. "How many ships are we talking about?" "Current. Ghost Fleet strength is approximately 15,000 vessels across all classes," Davis replied casually. "That doesn't include planetary defense systems, mobile weapons platforms, or the really classified projects." Stone stopped walking. 15,000 ships? The entire official Human Defense Corps has maybe 300 operational vessels. The official fleet exists to maintain the illusion that humanity is a minor military power. The Ghost Fleet exists to ensure our species' survival when that illusion is no longer useful. They entered a briefing room where holographic displays showed the current tactical situation throughout the solar system. Stone recognized the positions of hegemony forces, but the number of human assets on the display dwarfed what she thought existed. "Captain Stone," said a voice she recognized as Admiral Harrison, though she had never met him. "Welcome to humanity's real navy. We apologize for the deception, but operational security required that most of our own people remain unaware of our true capabilities." Commander Thane found himself facing a tactical situation that challenged every assumption he had made about this campaign. Human forces weren't just more numerous than intelligence had predicted. They were using technology that appeared superior to hegemony standards in several key areas. "Sir," reported his weapons officer, "the human vessels are using defensive systems we've never encountered. Our primary weapons aren't penetrating their shields." Thane studied the tactical display with growing unease. The human ships moved with a coordination that suggested instantaneous communication across vast distances. Their weapons fired in patterns that maximized effectiveness against Rigelian defensive configurations. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to anticipate hegemony tactical decisions before his own officers had finished calculating them. "They're fighting like they've studied our every move for decades," his tactical advisor observed. "That's because they have," came a new voice over the communication channel. The speaker identified himself as Admiral Yamamoto of the Terran Strategic Command. "We've been monitoring hegemony military operations throughout this sector for over a century. We know your tactics better than your own training manuals." Thane's intelligence officer began pulling up historical data. "Sir, Admiral Yamamoto was a human military leader from their early industrial period. He died centuries ago." "Death is temporary when your species takes the long view," Admiral Yamamoto's voice carried an eerie calm. "Humanity has been preparing for this war since before your great-grandparents were born. We've had time to study your weaknesses and plan accordingly." The tactical display showed human forces moving into positions that would have been impossible to coordinate without advance planning. The hegemony fleet found itself facing not a desperate last stand, but a carefully orchestrated military operation that had been centuries in the making. "Sir," whispered Thane's communications officer, "we're receiving surrender terms from the human forces." "They want us to surrender?" Thane couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. "Their planet is half destroyed and they're offering us surrender terms?" "No, sir. They're offering to accept our surrender." Thane looked out at the human fleet surrounding his forces. Ships that shouldn't exist, commanded by officers who should have been dead, using tactics that incorporated lessons from conflicts fought throughout galactic history. The hegemony had expected to conquer a young civilization. Instead, they had encountered something far more dangerous, an ancient military tradition that had been given time to prepare. For the first time in his career, Commander Thane began to consider the possibility that the hegemony had finally met their match. The final battle began not with the flash of weapons fire, but with a sound that no living being had ever heard in the vacuum of space. Across every frequency, on every communication channel, the combined voices of humanity's greatest military minds spoke in unison. "By the authority vested in us by the survival of our species, we hereby claim this system under the protection of the Terran Defense Compact. All hostile forces have 10 minutes to withdraw or face immediate destruction." Commander Thane listened to the transmission with all four of his ears, trying to process what he was hearing. The voices belonged to dozens of different speakers, but they spoke with perfect coordination across languages his translation systems identified as spanning thousands of years of human linguistic evolution. "Sir," his tactical officer reported with barely controlled panic, "I'm reading energy signatures, unlike anything in our databases. The human weapons are powering up, and the readings are off our measurement scales." Through the viewports of his flagship, Thane watched as space itself seemed to come alive with human military assets. Ships that had been invisible suddenly blazed. With running lights, weapons platforms that had disguised themselves as asteroids revealed their true nature. Most impossibly, the damaged human colonies below began launching their own defensive systems, turning the entire solar system into an integrated fortress. Admiral Torres stood on the reconstructed bridge of Earth's primary command center, watching displays that showed the true scope of humanity's preparation. Around her, officers she had thought killed in the early stages of the invasion worked at their stations with grim determination. The reports of their deaths had been carefully orchestrated deceptions, allowing key personnel to disappear into the shadow military that was now revealing itself. "Admiral," reported her tactical coordinator, "all Ghost Fleet units are in position. We have the hegemony forces surrounded on 17 different tactical levels. They cannot retreat, reinforce, or maneuver without our permission." Torres nodded. but her attention focused on a smaller display showing the lunar surface where alien excavators had destroyed humanity's most sacred historical site. Have our archaeological teams confirmed the extent of the damage? Yes, ma'am. The original Apollo 11 landing site has been completely destroyed, along with the memorial installations and preservation barriers. Torres felt a cold fury settle in her chest. Then there will be no quarter offered. They chose to make this personal. Throughout the solar system, human forces moved with the precision of a plan that had been refined over centuries. The Ghost. Fleet engaged hegemony vessels with weapons that seemed to violate known physical laws. Energy beams that curved through space to strike targets behind cover. Projectiles that phased through enemy shields before resuming solid form inside alien hulls. Defense systems that absorbed incoming fire and redirected it back at attackers, with improved targeting data. General Pike coordinated ground operations from his command post on Mars, but the battles he directed bore little resemblance to any warfare he had previously experienced. Human soldiers fought with tactical knowledge that spanned their entire military history, while alien invaders found themselves facing opponents who seemed to anticipate their every move. "Sir," reported Colonel Wright, "our infantry units are reporting something unusual. Individual soldiers are demonstrating combat skills far beyond their training levels. They're fighting like they have access to the collective experience of every warrior in human history." Pike studied the battlefield, feeds with growing amazement. Human fighters moved with the strategic awareness of ancient generals, the tactical flexibility of special forces veterans, and the technological expertise of future soldiers. They weren't just defending their homes, they were executing a military operation that incorporated lessons learned from every conflict humanity had ever fought. Captain Stone commanded her ship in the largest space battle in recorded galactic history, but found herself relying on tactical instincts that seemed to come from sources beyond her own experience. As she maneuvered through the chaos of combat, she could almost hear the voices of admirals from across human history advising her on ship positioning, weapon targeting, and strategic timing. "Ma'am," her communications officer called out, "we're receiving tactical updates from the digital command network. Admiral Nelson is coordinating our fleet movements, while General Patton is directing the assault formations." Stone would have found the statement impossible to believe a day earlier. Now, watching her ship respond to tactical guidance from commanders who had died centuries before spaceflight was invented, she simply acknowledged the report and continued fighting. The battle was not just between two opposing fleets, but between two completely different approaches to warfare. The hegemony fought as they always had, relying on superior firepower and proven tactics that had conquered dozens of civilizations. Humanity fought with the accumulated wisdom of their entire species, adapting strategies from every era of their military history to the realities of space combat. Dr. Harrison watched from Facility 7 as humanity's true nature revealed itself across the galaxy. The archives around him displayed real-time data showing human forces coordinating actions across multiple star systems. Ships that had been hiding in distant nebulae for decades suddenly appeared at key strategic points. Sleeper agents embedded in alien governments activated simultaneously. Most remarkably, human civilian populations throughout the galaxy began demonstrating combat capabilities that suggested their entire species had been preparing for this moment. "Doctor," Director Walsh said softly, "you're witnessing the culmination of humanity's greatest achievement. Not our technology or our weapons, but our ability to think beyond the limits of individual lifespans. Every human who has ever lived has contributed to this moment through the lessons they learned and the wisdom they passed down." The displays showed battles raging across 17 different star systems as humanity's hidden fleets engaged hegemony, forces that had never suspected the true scope of human expansion. What the aliens had believed to be primitive colonies revealed themselves as heavily fortified military installations. Trade routes that had seemed purely commercial transformed into strategic supply lines for the largest military operation in galactic history. Commander Thane made his final tactical decision as his flagship's hull began to buckle under weapons fire from sources he couldn't even identify. His fleet was surrounded, outgunned, and facing opponents who seemed to know his next move before he made it. The legendary hegemony military machine had encountered something it had never faced before, an enemy that had been given time to prepare. "Signal general retreat," Thane ordered, though he suspected it was already too late. "Sir," his communications officer reported with resignation, "the humans are jamming our retreat signals. They're also broadcasting a message on all frequencies." The voice that filled Thane's bridge belonged to Admiral Torres, but carried the authority of an entire civilization, speaking as one. "Commander Thane of the Rigelian Empire, your forces are hereby ordered to surrender unconditionally. You have violated sacred ground and committed acts of war against a peaceful species. Your surrender will be accepted with the understanding that you and your forces will face trial for crimes against sentient life." Thane looked out at the human fleet surrounding his position, ships whose designs incorporated technology he didn't understand, commanded by officers whose tactical knowledge seemed to span millennia. The hegemony had expected to conquer a young species in their first interstellar war. Instead, they had awakened something that had been waiting patiently for this exact confrontation. "Sir," whispered his tactical advisor, "our intelligence was completely wrong about these humans. This isn't their first interstellar war. This is their planned culmination of centuries of preparation." The surrender came not as a single moment, but as a gradual realization throughout the hegemony fleet that they were facing an impossible situation. Human forces had not just defended their territory, they had demonstrated military capabilities that exceeded anything in the known galaxy. Ships that could appear and disappear at will. Weapons that seemed to bend the laws of physics. Most disturbing of all, tactical coordination that suggested their entire species functioned as a single, vast military intelligence. Admiral Torres accepted the hegemony surrender from the bridge of her flagship with Earth's wounded surface visible through the viewing ports behind her. The planet bore scars from the alien bombardment, but those scars would heal. What would not heal was the galaxy's understanding of humanity's place in the cosmic order. "Broadcast this message to all hegemony territories," Torres ordered her communications staff. "Humanity has defended itself successfully against unprovoked aggression. We hereby claim our rightful place among the galactic powers with all the rights and responsibilities that entails. Any future acts of aggression against human territory or human citizens will be met with the full force of our military capabilities." The message that went out across the galaxy carried more than just words. It included tactical footage of the battle, showing human weapons and ships that defied current understanding of military technology. It demonstrated coordination between forces separated by light years of space, suggesting communication methods that operated faster than the speed of light itself. General Pike stood in the ruins of the Lunar Memorial Site, where human engineers were carefully reconstructing the monuments that alien excavators had destroyed. The sacred footprints of humanity's first steps beyond Earth were gone forever, but new markers would commemorate both the original achievement and the price paid to defend it. "Sir," Colonel Wright approached with a report from the reconstruction teams, "the archaeological survey is complete. We've recovered fragments of the original artifacts, and the engineering teams are confident they can create a memorial that honors both the original site and our defense of it." Pike nodded, but his attention focused on the Earth, hanging in the black sky above them. The planet showed the lights of reconstruction as humanity rebuilt what had been damaged in the invasion. But more than physical reconstruction was taking place. The entire human species had been transformed by the revelation of their own hidden nature. Dr. Harrison completed his final report on the Prometheus project from his position aboard one of humanity's most advanced research vessels. The ship, itself was a testament to their species' hidden capabilities, incorporating technology that wouldn't be officially invented for decades. Around him, crew members worked with the quiet satisfaction of people who had successfully completed a task that had taken centuries to accomplish. "Director Walsh," Harrison said as he transmitted his completed analysis, "I need to ask one final question. How long ago did humanity realize we would need to become something more than we appeared?" Walsh's image smiled from the communication screen. "Dr. Harrison, humanity has always understood that survival requires adaptation. The moment we looked up at the stars and realized we weren't alone, we began preparing for the day when we would need to prove we deserved to be there." The final entry in Harrison's report would reshape humanity's understanding of their own history. The Prometheus Project represents not just military preparation, but the conscious evolution of human civilization from a single-planet species to a galactic power. We didn't just defend ourselves against alien invasion. We revealed that we had been preparing for our place among the stars since our first steps beyond Earth. Throughout human space, celebrations marked not just military victory, but the awakening of humanity's true potential. The species that had seemed young and vulnerable had revealed itself as something far more dangerous. An ancient civilization that had learned patience as a weapon and preparation as a philosophy. Commander Thane, now a prisoner aboard a human vessel, watched through a viewport as his captor's ships moved through space with casual mastery of technologies his people couldn't match. He had conquered 47 worlds by targeting species before they could develop adequate defenses. Now he understood why humanity had succeeded where others had failed. They had never been unprepared. They had simply been waiting for the right moment to show the galaxy who they really were. The legend wasn't just awakened. The legend had been waiting all along for someone foolish enough to test it.